you like to introduce yourself? I obviously know who you are. So, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Hello, so I'm Jasper Hamill. I'm a journalist of some vintage, been a journalist for 20 years. I started off in the arts, went into hard news, chasing criminals on the streets of Glasgow, and then I became a technology journalist for the Register. I've written for Forbes, and I was technology editor at two British national titles, The Sun and Metro. And now I'm an independent journalist, so I run my own magazine called Machine, which is, well, it's not really a magazine, a publication, which is brand new and on a mission to share revenue with readers. And I make a living elsewhere by doing copywriting and PR.
Yeah, and I think that's a great introduction to why I've started a mainframe book club with you, because I thought, how could I start a mainframe book club? Where would I go, and who's the best person to start with? And I thought, let's not start with a mainframer, just to be controversial. Um, so obviously we know that you're in the UK, and what I wanted to do is just paint a picture for people as to why I thought it'd be useful to bring you in. Not only are you a technology journalist, so you're able to talk on that aspect, but as we've moved forward in the years of the mainframe and people have built their skills, we're seeing much more with social media influence,
Mhm.
forums, posts, white papers. It seems to be much more now about getting a message out there, whether it's in a post, whether it's in a forum, even just sharing information with colleagues now. It seems to be, we seem in a much more social media based uh, world, really. And I thought, speaking to you, I know that you always share tips as to how to deliver what we would say is good copy, for want of a better term.
Mhm.
And I thought that would be a really interesting way to show that the mainframe is modern, diverse, and we're looking to be at the cutting edge. And one way of doing that is how we can improve our communication. So therefore, I thought let's bring a tech journalist of some repute onto the book club to launch it. So that's why I thought of you. Um, so I thought the first thing I would do is maybe ask, in terms of for your role as a journalist and in terms of writing good copy, etc., are there
Mhm.
any books that you found helpful that you would say that's a go-to book for me that has resonated? It may not be necessarily a journalism book. It may be something you've just read that's obviously stayed with you. So is there any books that really have landed with you?
Well, in terms of how to write, I think sort of one of the best writers is Ernest Hemingway, who was famous for his short stories and his really snappy fiction. And that he was, in fact, a journalist. He started off as a news journalist, and you can really tell it in his writing. So the best way to kind of sum it up is he would take these big long stories that maybe, 10 pages long and slash them back. So they were absolutely minimal. So there wasn't a wasted word. Everything was in the active voice. And it was all about what wasn't said. It's quite British in that sense, actually, even though he was American. Like British humour kind of relies on that, doesn't it? The stuff that's not said. Peppa Pig, for instance, I think is a great example of British humour. It's all about the unsaid humour. But Ernest Hemingway is a fantastic writer. His short stories are a sort of tour de force in very effective communication. So if he makes every word work. So every sentence, every word in that sentence is doing the job of 20. And it grabs you, it keeps you, it leaves questions in your mind. One of the great ways to get people to engage with your copy, is to leave questions in their mind unanswered. That we call this the curiosity gap in journalism, where you're putting a headline and you leave something out of it tactfully, as long as you answer it, because people get annoyed if you don't answer it. And I think Ernest Hemingway is really the master of that kind of writing. I'm not endorsing his views on some of the more controversial stuff. I think some of his female characters are absolutely woeful, and I think very poorly developed and kind of cliched. But in terms of the actual writing, and I didn't really like his stance on war. I don't particularly like war, and I don't think it's particularly
No,
wonderful
me
to go
neither.
around shooting people. Um, but in terms of the actual stylistic aspects of his writing, I think he's brilliant. And another book I'd recommend actually is a sort of a more journalistic one is In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. I hope I've pronounced that right. I think it's Capote, and he was a sort of a really interesting bloke from America, and it was written in the 60s, and he befriended this murderer who had done really an unspeakable act, and he befriended him and probably fell in love with him, I think, whilst he was in jail, and followed him all the way up until he got the electric chair, I believed, and then kind of turned on him. Really, the book was meant to be written from his perspective, but wasn't particularly favorable. But it's a brilliant book. It's kind of fiction, but it's kind of fact. It's called something called The New Journalism in the 60s. And it's just a brilliant piece of storytelling that I would really recommend to everyone. Um, it's journalists don't always write well at length, but is an excellent example. But Ernest Hemingway is better in this short form.
Well, one of the things that also prompts me here is that I've been asked about what we have is it's a technical process called call for papers.
Hmm.
And then we often submit a short summary of what we'd like to present. And then after that, what we do is we then present, and then you have the ability to write a white paper around what you've presented. So I think some of the tips that you've given here, active voice, great. You know, write in an active voice because it's engaging. Review what you've written, cut it all back. Make sure that you're really hammering to the point and you're not just waffling. Cut it down, much more impact. Ask some open questions. Ask some questions that you don't answer that you want other people to consider. These are all great tips. One of the other ones, and I mean, you share so many, but you can think, I think it was only the other day, you shared the question about the opposites rule. You know, in corporate writing,
Hmm.
opposites attract,
Hmm.
and to kind of balance against one another. If it's complex, make it simple. If it's dry, make it interesting. And it was very interesting to see that how we could take something from corporate writing, but adapt that into maybe our white papers. So that after we've done a presentation and we're trying to tell everyone else out there, hey, this is what we presented. Here's a summary of what you sat through. These are all great tips. And if
Hmm.
people follow you, you do share a lot of great tips. And I think that's something that people watching this could take from this to just, I'll share your contact at the end, but not only are you a good tech journalist, but also you offer advice and help to how to improve your writing. And I think that's really important in how we go today.
Well, that's
So
very kind. One of the structures I would actually mention is a classic journalistic structure. It's called the inverted pyramid, and this is kind of an infamous way of writing. So much so that when Boris Johnson was asked if he was having an affair, he replied, "No, this is an inverted pyramid of piffle." And what the inverted pyramid is you introduce something very generally, which is the top of the inverted pyramid, the biggest bit, you know, a pyramid standing on its point. And then gradually you zoom in and become more and more detailed. And I think that's a kind of classic journalistic way of doing things. On the internet, in fact, actually, it doesn't always work because if you give everyone the story in the top line, they'll get the story and they'll click off. You have to kind of tease them a little bit and without frustrating them. There's always the risk of frustrating them if you don't get to the point quickly. But that's a kind of classic journalistic technique, which is definitely very useful for writing white papers. And I guess white papers do follow that, don't they? They have the summary at the beginning, and that kind of gets you all excited, and then you zoom into the more technical bits as it gets more and more difficult as you get to the point of the pyramid.
yeah, this is what I was going to say. We've sort of we have now IBM Tech Exchange. We have a GSE event. I also run an event called Mainframers. So we do 15-minute lightning talks as well. So that's really good if you want to sample and get out there and have a go. But there's now so many different ways. There's podcasts, there's webinars, there's formal events. Even just internally now, a lot of companies are turning to hackathons.
Hmm.
So all of this is all really good because even if you do a good hackathon, at the end of it, they say, right, summarize what you've done. And knowing how to present in a really impactful way is really helpful. So
Hmm.
I think all of these tips are really useful. The books given have been really useful. And just talking to you is really helpful because I can think of a few people that have approached me recently and said, could you give me some tips on how to write a call for paper?
Hmm.
And IBM have actually said, well, they're going to run an event to help people. But I almost feel like this is complementary. So this is all great stuff. And I've kept it quite short. I've kept it quite punchy. But the only other thing I would ask is, are there any books that, as a journalist, that you feel sort of like lend towards the soft skills that you need to improve your writing skills? Have there been anything that you've sort of general, more
Yeah,
broader?
do you know, I haven't actually ever read many books about how to write as a journalist. But I just tend to sort of practice. There's a kind of an arcane. You pick it up off other journalists, and you're told what journalists often say to each other is, "What's your top line?" You know, so when you how can you sum your story up in one sentence, basically? And I think that's a useful discipline, and it's that storytelling that's vital. And in technology, I think the best example of storytelling I've encountered is Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, and this was the kind of the book that introduced the idea of super intelligence of an AI that's smarter than a human, and it has all this absolutely brilliant storytelling and thought experiments which bring the topic to life. For instance, the most famous is the paperclip maximiser, and this is an AI system that's built to, you know, very famous, built to design paperclips, and it gets so good at making paperclips that it, you know, destroys humans and turns the whole planet into paperclips. Then it goes out into the cosmos and start turning the whole universe into paperclips. And it's a brilliant story about AI alignment, a brilliant way of illustrating it. And it's just chocked full of these really quite, in my opinion, tabloid kind of stories that really, really illustrate it. And in terms of technology storytelling, I'd say it's a masterclass. And he keeps doing it, Bostrom. He was the one that popularized the simulation theory. Obviously, the Matrix popularized that as well, really, arguably, and Descartes, you know, all those hundreds of years ago. But I would recommend Superintelligence. It is a famous book, but it seems to be a seminal text, and I haven't seen many better examples of storytelling around technology.
Also, just share one did you know about Jasper at this point as well, is that Jasper's actually put his reputation on the line as a journalist and did take on AI to see who could write some better articles. So I think just to give you a little shout out there and an acknowledgement,
Thanks.
is yeah, that's a brave move on your part.
Well, it hasn't been so far. I've not been really impressed, but I think I need to test it a bit more. My next one's actually coming up probably today or tomorrow. I'm going to test it writing one of my favorite stories about the end of the world. I love the concept of P-doom. You know, how likely that artificial intelligence is to cause the end of the world. It's kind of one of my favorite topics. So I'm going to give it one more kind of tabloidy story, and then I'm going to do something corporate next week. I make a lot of my money through copywriting, so that'll be, you know, taking a white paper and making it punchy and friendly for the press, or turning it into an op-ed, or turning it into a social media post, whatever it is. And I'm going to test it with that. And my feeling is it's going to be much better at corporate writing, and sort of business writing, than it is at sort of writing like me, who is uh, I don't have any pretensions. I'm a tabloid journalist. I love the tabloids. I have no ambitions to be a broadsheet, which is lucky because they have no ambitions to have me. So that kind of works. But I really love the tabloids, and tabloid tech journalism is definitely a sort of newish, unexplored thing. And so I'm going to test it out on something a bit more corporate, which I think it might be a bit better at. But yeah, it's been really quite abysmal, I have to say, so far. I'm a little bit fussy. It gets the facts wrong.
Yes, yeah,
There's
yeah.
complex issues. I gave it these tweets from Sam Altman last time, and it was, you know, sum up the story in these tweets. It didn't know who was talking in the tweets. It just couldn't work out what was going on. And you think, you know, AGI, artificial general intelligence, is there really a link between GPT 4.5 and AGI? I mean, I have my doubts. I could be proven wrong. Maybe one day AI will be rooting through everything we've done, and we'll watch this interview and decide to sort of subject me to eternal digital torment, because I questioned its, you know, superpower. That's the thought experiment called Rocco's basilisk, which is the idea that, you know, got to be careful what you say about AI, because one day it will know, And if you ever upload your mind to the Matrix or the universal mainframe, it's going to torture you in a kind of digital hell forever. So, let's hope that doesn't happen. Fingers crossed.
That's the only other thing I've got a note in my mind to say. What about most of us now using the web? And you've
Mhm.
mentioned the web. Is there any forums or websites that you use that you think would be worthy of mentioning?
I use all sorts of forums and websites. They are becoming a bit sort of consolidated, aren't they? And Reddit is always useful, but there's other more specific ones, kind of Bitcoin forum I like for crypto stories. I got a great story from there once actually about a bloke who was a Native American. These are some of and the reserves. The Native American reserves are some of the poorest parts of America. Well, they are the poorest parts of
Yeah.
America, and he wanted to swap the dollar for Bitcoin. He said it could be the new Buffalo. And I spoke to him, and it was a story for Forbes. And off the back of that, he got to open up the stock exchange, ring the bell for the stock exchange, all the rest
Wow.
of it. So these are great places for stories. And in terms of sites I use Arxiv. Arxiv is fantastic. It's an open source, I think you would call it open source or open access, maybe is a better way of putting it, place for uploading non-peer reviewed papers. So you put them out there and you kind of academics will sort of subject their work to the rough and tumble of the internet. So they might get picked up by journalists, they might get picked up by other academics, and the sheer volume of stuff published on there is really quite astonishing. So a lot of it's AI at the moment. I read AI, robotics, and more um, esoteric stuff, cryptography, all these kind of topics, and that is a real treasure trove of stories. Sometimes, you run the risk of covering something that turns out to be wrong because it's not peer reviewed. But I think that's part of the process. I think this idea of the fixedness of truth is actually kind of a bit of a retro idea, and I think Arxiv is a nod to that. You put it out, and if it gets proven wrong, it gets proven wrong. It gets proven wrong publicly, and you move forward together. This idea that the scientific paper is the be all and the end all. It's the unequivocal truth forevermore because the clever people said so. I think is kind of old fashioned. People might tell me off for that, but that's what I think. And Arxiv is part of that. So I find it fascinating view. It's also got a really good space section. And I don't write much about space anymore, but when I was at the Metro, when they discovered that picture, when they took that picture, the first picture of the black hole, I spent a whole summer writing about black holes because for some reason people were really interested in them. And it was one of my happiest summers of my life, actually. And I did it in my own unique tabloid way. Like, for instance, they found this black hole and it had fired its beams directly at Earth. So I had the headline "Black Hole Fires Death Beams Directly at Earth." Obviously, didn't mention that it was 400 light years away, 400 million light years away, whatever it is, till slightly further down in the article. But it was a very happy summer. So the space stuff on Arxiv is absolutely brilliant. I read a paper the other day about turning an asteroid into a spaceship, carving it out, hollowing it out, and turning it into a spaceship and setting sail for Alpha Centauri or whatever. It's just brilliant. And stuff about Dyson spheres. Dyson spheres are these theoretical megastructures that would surround a star. So if you're a very advanced society, you'd build a power station surrounding a star and it would harvest all the energy. And it
Yes.
just really sets my
Yeah.
mind
Yep.
ablaze. So I would recommend that to anyone. Arxiv, Arxiv. Brilliant.
And what I'm going to say here is that harks back to something that I really love because I grew up watching Tomorrow's World. Shows
Me
my
too.
age a bit here, but obviously the mainframe was fundamental in getting us to space. But between space and applying science to see how you could take what sometimes looks a bit raw and where you could go with it. My brain loves doing it. It loves to read little stories in different places and think, I wonder how you could use them and where that might actually end up because it's always interesting to see. Sometimes what you think and where it's going to go is completely different to where it ends up. So it's
Mhm.
always a fascinating. I find that fascinating sometimes reading these sort of things. It keeps my brain ticking over.
Well, I remember you telling me about space diamonds, these
Yeah,
asteroids
yeah.
that are made of diamonds coming down, and, could be eventually sort of harvested by robots, perhaps. Harvested is the wrong word, mined by
Elon Musk,
robots.
maybe.
Yeah, Elon Musk, yeah. And then brought back to Earth and using the mainframe. I thought that was brilliant. That really set my mind going. Me too. I just can't get enough of space and technology. My two favorite topics, I have to say, and science in general, to be honest.
Look, I think in terms of this first book club, it'll be very interesting to see the feedback because you are a tech journalist. You've got a wealth of knowledge. We've shared some great advice that everyone can use for tech exchange, for call for papers, just in writing, in sharing social media posts, etc. So I think there's a lot there for people that I'll try and summarize. I'll also make a note of the books you've recommended and some tips, and I'll share this as a post afterwards. And I'll share this video. I'll try and edit it a bit just to make myself look even better.
Yeah, if you can Photoshop on the fly, that'd be very useful. But for me, I'm not talking about you. I have to
Yeah,
say, if you could
I'll,
Photoshop me on the fly, put some filters on,
I'll
that'd
add
be great.
myself with lots of very pointed questions, as if I knew. Oh yes, tell me all about those cubes and tell me about space. And yes,
Absolutely. Well, pleasure to be here, Andy. It's great to make your
yeah,
acquaintance of late and be involved. And I would like to start writing stories about the mainframe, to be honest. So if anyone wants to get in touch, this is a fascinating topic. I once met a journalist about 15 years ago who said that was the thing to pursue, and I ended up going to the Mirror not long afterwards. So yeah, couldn't do it at the Mirror, but but you can now for machine.news, www.machine.news. Shameless plug there.
yeah.
Um, but can now. So yeah, thanks very much for having me.